An increasing number of wars and conflicts, escalating economic uncertainty, global rhetoric dominated by enmity and self-interest. It seems we are as far away from global peace as we ever have been. Tonight on Between the Lines, we speak to Mohamed ElBaradei, the Nobel Peace Laureate, about whether the world is indeed stumbling towards catastrophe. Joining me on our program tonight is the former Vice President of Egypt, for 12 years, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, diplomat and lawyer, and a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei. Thank you very much for being on Between the Lines.
Thank you very much, Timur, for having me.
Now, you're in Singapore as part of the Bridges lecture series, Dialogue Towards a Culture of Peace. And what your particular angle is here, and has been for a while, is your fear, as you've expressed it, that the world is sleepwalking to self-destruction. Why do you think that, and explain what you mean?
Because, Timur, all the writing in the wall is not leading really to a culture of peace or an environment of peace. I mean, the gross, obscene inequality we have, in terms of, rich and poor, in terms of abject poverty, the kind of security system we rely on, we still have 16,000 nuclear warheads 25 years after the end of the Cold War. We have an international institutions that have become anachronistic, the whole UN system, frankly, which has been designed for a different era, not the kind of world we live in today. So I see while we are more and more connected, we are also developing this culture of otherness, and that's my worry, that we still our primary choice for settling our differences is violence, is force, and if you see the number of wars going around, and in that environment, when you have this antagonism, the us versus them, and you have all this arsenal of weapons, not only nuclear but chemical and biological and all that sort of thing, unless we change course, unless we have a different mindset, as I said, understand that we have to find a system of governance, if you like, global governance, based on human solidarity and not on just myopic geopolitical interests. We can end up sleepwalking into self-destruction. I mean,
Let me stop you for a moment, because there are a number of elements there that we could pick up on, but just one, in the broad realm of things, you mentioned there are a number of wars going on around the world, a great deal of tension around the world, and let's focus specifically on what's happening in Ukraine now and the threat of arming the Kiev government by the West, and the potential that Russia will then retaliate to that action. How significant do you see that as a source of global war?
Well, it is significant that you have a war in Europe right now. I mean, I see two phenomena that are very alarming, or just encapsulate the kind of world we live in. One is the Ukrainian situation, when you have war in Europe, or almost a war in Europe, and the ISIL, when you have an extremist group in control of a piece of land as large as Switzerland. I mean, these are not the kind of thing one should not just look at the symptoms, but should try to understand why do we have that. Ukraine, I mean, you mentioned Ukraine is, of course, a serious issue. There is no other way except a political solution, as everybody has been saying. There is no other way except that we found a modicum by which Russia should have a different relationship with Europe and with the US. I mean, we hoped for that since the end of the Cold War. That didn't happen. There is a sense in Russia that it is being isolated. Rightly or wrongly, we need to address that issue. And
is dialogue going to occur? Because it seems at the moment that this is more of a game, not only Russia, I mean the relationship with China too, a similar situation where the great powers are jostling for position and position.
Again, that doesn't lead us anywhere. It's everybody's waiting who's going to blink first. I mean, they both need to blink at the same time. They need to understand that there is no other way, as everybody. I mean, we keep saying these, words, we need to talk, we have to work together, but we have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And Russia, Europe, NATO, US relationship need to be regulated in different ways. 20 years ago, we were talking about Russia being part of NATO. We were talking about the Russia-NATO agreement, OECD, the organization that have everybody in Europe together. I mean, now we have an environment of confrontation, which is very worrying indeed. I mean, not only because these are, the significance of having a war in Europe, because you have Russia and NATO, face to face, first time since the end of the Cold War. And you need to fix that, because what message are you sending to the rest of the world? And I think, to me, the solution is very simple. It's a dialogue and it's equity. I mean, you need to make sure that everybody in Ukraine, for example, have the same rights, the same free. I mean, you need to have probably some decentralization in eastern Ukraine, but I'm not the one to prescribe the solution. The parties need to sit together.
But at least, are you seeing any suggestion that a dialogue is imminent, that an understanding that dialogue is the way forward is agreed upon by all parties? Because to many, it doesn't seem as if that's happening.
I think so. I mean, the fact that Angela Merkel and Mr. Hollande were in Moscow, talking to Vladimir Putin, I mean, that in itself is it's an indication that everybody is searching for a dialogue. I mean, everybody wants a face saving, of course. Everybody does not want to come out, looks as if they are defeated. But we need to overcome that. We need to understand that the stakes are much higher than just that.
And yet the irony is that organizations like Bridges and the International Institutes for Peace and all those who would talk the language of peace are rarely seen in the media. What we hear are those people who are calling for confrontation, or at least calling for the exercise of power.
And that's what I mentioned, that we could sleepwalking and self-destruction, because, what you hear is those who are, and those are the ones who gets the media attention. Let's go into confrontation. Let us prevail. Nobody's going to prevail. This is one message people need to understand. At this time, the 21st century, nobody's going to prevail over the other. Either we're going to all be able to swim together, or we're all going to sink together. That's something we need to get. I think it's very important what you mentioned, that people need to get engaged. People need to be able to speak to their leaders, that we do not want to see yet another confrontation, yet another war. We need to find a better architecture where we can all live together in peace and dignity.
And
that's doable.
And as you said just a moment ago, we need a new system. But it's one thing to say we need dialogue to solve particular issues like what's happening in the Ukraine. It's another thing to say that the world and the way it operates and the way the interactions internationally occur need to change wholesale. How likely is that to happen?
It's not highly likely, unfortunately, because of the current of government structures, leadership we have. But I have hope that civil society, in my view, what you're saying, the people who really care about the future of humanity, get more engaged, put pressure on the politician. See, what we need is a change of structure, a whole completely overhaul of the new system. And that is a long-term process. While government think short-term, think in terms of very, I should say, myopic national politics. So it doesn't really fit. You need somehow we be able together to work together in a cooperative mode and think long-term and understand that we need a new system that is going to take some time more than one-term election.
Who needs to lead this process, this cooperative movement? Because we seem to have a bunch of people who are more intent upon trying to press their own case and make their own statements rather than actually listening to the next guy. We've got Benjamin Netanyahu going to Congress against the explicit desires of half of the US polity to try and press his case against an Iran situation that somebody is trying to solve. President Obama's approach to the Ukraine situation is not exactly an open hand right now, as is indeed President Putin's. Who is going to lead the process towards dialogue?
I think ideally, of course, ideally or not ideally, realistically, the ones who have to lead are the big boys. I'm thinking of the US, of Europe, of Russia, of China, of India. These all people need, Brazil, all these countries need to be on the table,
But you mentioned that the UN is no longer fit for purpose.
Well,
what's the solution there?
It could be a forum. I don't worry about the forum. What's really important is to get the mindset that these people understand that we have a dysfunctional structure and we need to fix it, and because if we don't fix it, we are all going to lose. But what you are saying also, Timur, is quite right, that within national boundaries, countries are being fragmented. As you see it in different places. They are not even of the same mind. And we lose a lot in terms of common sense solution to international issues on the altar of domestic politics. What you see, what you mentioned right now, for example, the confrontation between Congress and Barack Obama, is that helpful? It's neither helpful to the US or to the rest of the world.
You mentioned before about this idea of perhaps a more global governance system, or at least a more global interaction in some ways. How likely is that to happen? I mean, a lot of people are worried that the move towards global governance is somehow a shady and opportunistic grab by the elites who are already controlling individual nations.
Well, it shouldn't. I mean, the starting point should be human dignity and human security. Whatever, I mean, we tried in the past. We tried to go through the city-state during the Greek time, the empire, the states with sovereignty, independent entities. I don't care about the national, the unit, the social unit. What I care about is, are we able to provide human dignity to every human being? And we are not so far. And this is part of our failure as we go through the human project. But what I mean by more recalibration of the structure, that we are not seem able right now to resolve any of our challenges, as you call it, because all the challenges we are facing are challenges that no one country can deal with it alone. If you look at terrorism, if you look at climate change, if you look at arms control, communicable disease, drug control, no one country, as we have seen in every area, is able to do it alone. But yet, they are not yet able to come to grips with that and understand that neither the government on their own are able to do it, nor international organizations who are unfortunately bereft of resources, of authority. They have systemic dysfunction in a systemic way. So we need to take, but the key issue, of course, I mean, it's easy to diagnose a problem, but who is going to act on it? And that question you put is absolutely very apt, is we need somebody to take the leadership, but we're not going to see that in the kind of mood between the US and Russia, for example.
Right. Okay, well, one of your areas of expertise is global nuclear issues. When we come back after the short break, I want to ask you about your comment that you think that has been a failure of international policy. We're going to take a short break. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to Between the Lines. We're talking tonight to Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei about the prospects for global peace or otherwise. You mentioned in the first half your disappointment with what's happening in the global nuclear arms situation. President Obama came to power with strong statements as to how he wanted to attack this problem. How has he performed in that regard?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, everybody was so delighted, exhilarated when President Obama made his famous Prague speech when he committed the US to move toward a world free from nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, nothing much has happened since. Whether that is his own fault, it's a fault of the fractured or fight, if you like, between the legislative process, legislative arm, and the executive arm. I think a lot of that, whether that also is a result of the failure of communication between the Russia and the US, the building of the necessary trust. I mean, to reduce, to eliminate, or at least drastically reduce nuclear weapon, you need to build the trust instead, and that's not happening right now. But to me, it's almost insane, that 25 years after the end of the Cold War, we still have 16,000 nuclear warheads. We still have 2,000 nuclear weapons on alert status. We still have 9 nuclear weapon states, and yet we're telling everybody else you cannot touch nuclear weapons. So all the big boys are still relying on nuclear weapons, modernizing nuclear weapons, but telling everybody else that these are just for us. And again, I always say that a system of security that is based on some are more equal than other is not sustainable, is not functioning.
What we actually have is a situation where more focus is being paid to the idea that Iran may or may not want to have nuclear weapons. We know that they don't have them, rather than actually trying to deal with the weapons that we do have. And ironically, as we mentioned, the Prime Minister of Israel is going to Congress to try to make the case that the negotiations with Iran should stop.
Well, any system, without getting into specific, any system that is not based on fairness and equity. I mean, you can, if you are an Iranian or if you are a North Korean even, you can or anywhere. You can ask yourself, why shouldn't I have the same weapons that the big boys are relying on? Why are they telling themselves that they need it for their own security, but I cannot touch it? It is not that we have, again, us versus them, and if you want to work on Iran, if you want to work on North Korea, if you want to work on wannabe nuclear weapon states, you have to provide an example. You have to provide a model. You have to show that you are really serious on the commitment you made 45 years ago to eliminate nuclear weapons.
Well, I mean, let's just be clear on this. I mean, you say wannabe states. As the IAEA head for a very long time, you were unconvinced by the argument that Iran was seeking nuclear weapons.
What we are saying that there are certain issues that need to be clarified, but we haven't seen Iran actually developing nuclear weapons, and that I think stands today. That there are certain research activities that need to be clarified, possibly have been related to a weapon program, but we haven't seen any nuclear weapon material being used in Iran for nuclear weapon, or we haven't seen any actual development of nuclear weapons.
And indeed, in your memoirs, you said that a lot of the accusations that were thrown on Iran were based on evidence that was unconfirmed and was not even available for scrutiny because the US would not allow it.
That is correct.
So, and yet now we have, heading up the IAEA, a new regime which seems insistent upon pursuing a line that you abandoned yourself. Yeah. So how likely are we to get some sort of agreement in a circumstance where the IAEA seems to have become politicized?
Well, I think the agreement basically depends on the P5+1 and Iran dialogue. I mean, and not necessarily. I mean, the history. I mean, even the U.S. Intelligence, all the U.S. intelligence have concluded that Iran has been developing some research work on nuclear weapons, but they stopped in 2003. That still stands until today. So what we are talking about, the concern, we are talking about history. To me, if we need to fix now the future, then this is a priority. Make sure that Iran or anybody else, there is enough confidence that neither Iran will develop nuclear weapon, and also the other guys should start to move on nuclear disarmament. The history, we need to look at it, but to me, it's not the most immediate priority. The most immediate priority is today, and today there is a deal that could be made. There is a deal that we could have had, in fact, 10 years ago, in fact, even a better deal. And as a result, in my view, of mismanagement, we haven't gotten that. However, we didn't need to look back to commiserate about the past. We need to see today that there is an agreement between Iran and the West right now, the U.S. in particular, is a win-win situation.
Well, you say an agreement between Iran and the West, but how rational is it to pursue any kind of nuclear dialogue with Iran, and indeed about broader global denuclearization, when the one state in the middle of all this discussion is, who's trying to, in many ways, foment war with Iran, is the one state whose entire nuclear program is a taboo to be spoken of?
Again, this is part of the double standard. I mean, as you know, if you go to the Middle East, this creates a deep sense of humiliation. That's why, for example, Israel is allowed to keep a nuclear arsenal, or everybody think that they have nuclear arsenal, and while everybody else is sitting there naked, and this. So when I talk about a deal with Iran, you are not really talking a deal about nuclear weapons or nuclear energy. You are really talking about a deal about regional security, and regional security has to fix, the Palestinian issue, the Israeli nuclear weapon issue. You need to Syria. You need to deal with Libya. You cannot. Nuclear weapons are a tool for security or insecurity, and you cannot deal with it in isolation. So my view that you need to take a global approach to the Middle East. In fact, my view today that the Middle East need a peace conference. It's similar to the one you had after the First World War, when you put everything on the pot. You put the Iranian issue, you put the Israeli issue, the Palestinian issue, weapons issues, you put governance issues, Syria, Lebanon. All these issues, Timur, are linked, and we are not going to solve any one of them.
But again, how likely is anything like that to happen?
All I can tell you that I can, say what I think need to be done, but how likely, again, that depends on how the politicians are really going to see that in the future, nothing is going to move unless they do that. You know?
Do you see any progress being made in issues like ISIL, in the Syria issue? There's this recognition now that perhaps the treatment of Bashar al-Assad needs to change in order to solve the ISIL issue. Do you see any movement towards any kind of proactive agreement or dialogue that might help in that region?
I don't see. Again, this is, I mean, you can take any of these issues and you see gross mismanagement, for example. I mean, Syria right now, I mean, there's 200...
Gross mismanagement by whom?
By everybody. I mean, Syria, for example, I mean, either in many situations, nobody steps in. If you look at Darfur, if you look at Rwanda, if you look at Congo, millions of people died. Nobody even bothered, you know, to stop the killing or protect the civilians.
But in a way, some would argue that in areas where people have stepped in to try and protect, or whatever it is their agenda is, they've made the situation worse.
They stepped in the wrong way. I mean, if you look at Libya, for example, yeah, they stepped to get rid of Gaddafi, but they didn't think of the day after. In Syria, 200,000 people died, innocent civilian. Nobody cared about. The Syria is being completely destroyed. You have 3 million refugees, Syrian refugees. We are not even paying for their well-being. Mr. Guterres, the head of the UNHCR, is begging for $4 billion to just feed these people. This is less than probably 0.25% of what we spent on armament, and yet nobody is paying. So we have a lot of major issues that we are not addressing, and then we are complaining at the end, seeing, oh my God, we have ISIL, we have Al-Qaeda. Well, these are the result of this foul environment that we are living in.
What about in your own country? In Egypt, we have a new leader who took over by military coup to depose an organization that you seem to believe should be involved in the conversation anyway. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood are now, again, persona non grata. Is the Egyptian progress right now going in the right direction?
Well, I think in Egypt, like in every other place, you need to have a process of national reconciliation and inclusive, pluralistic society. You know, that is not happening right now. I mean, I still believe that the future of Egypt lies in finding a way similar to what happened in South Africa, a system of transitional justice, accountability, of course. If any crimes have been committed by either side, they have to be you know, dealt with. But at the end, we need to look to the future. You need to understand that you cannot exclude any part of society, whether you 100% disagree with them. But to do that, Timur, you need to agree on the basic law, you know, that what kind of values you are going to live in, irrespective of where you are coming from.
Is Sisi the right man to establish that basic understanding?
Well, we will have to see. But as I said, I'm not talking personality. I'm talking issues. And the issue right now to me is, when are we going to stop? Hopefully soon. You know, that dehumanizing each other and trying to understand that irrespective of our agreement, we live under the same roof. We have to find a formula so we can live without killing each other.
Well, let's finish where we began, and the question of whether peace is more likely than war right now. I mean, everything we've spoken of in the past half hour has involved the almost intractable problems that are occurring all over the world. How likely do you see peace as opposed to war in the next 2 or 3 years? How worried are you about the concerns that some are raising that tactical nuclear weaponry is now a very real possibility in the Ukraine?
Yeah. Well, I don't think nuclear will be used. I think everybody understands in Ukraine that you know, if you start even touching nuclear weapons, you know, we can end up annihilating ourselves. So, however, I don't exclude any, you know, whether, as long as weapons are there, you know, there is always a risk, you know. And Bill Perry, the former Secretary of Defense in the U.S., recently, you know, said that we managed to avoid nuclear holocaust by good luck more than by good management. So we need to keep that in mind. I mean, that's the risk. But talking about peace in general, well, I'm not very optimistic. I'm very worried because the drivers of peace, which is dialogue, respect, you know, what have you, is not being used, and the rhetoric we hear all the time is confrontation, dehumanizing, you know, stereotyping, you know, using force, and it's then up to us meaning not just the leaders, but up to us, to the people. Do we need to fix the world we live in? Do we have, in the 21st century, are we going to continue what we have seen, say, in Europe, 300 years of civil wars, of religious wars, or are we have learned from our own mistakes? These are the fundamental questions we need to address.
Dr. ElBaradei, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much, Timur, for having me.